I'd like to invite to the stage our next panel who will engage this question of what is true, what is truth. So Christian, Marjorie, and Vijay, if you could join me on stage. So we have not only multiple continents reflected here, but also multiple perspectives and backgrounds, your role with respect to truth. So I'd like to ask each of you first to give us a sense, what is your role with respect to truth? Marjorie, why don't you start?
Well, actually, so I'm supposed to be the journalist on the panel, so I guess that as a media, I'm supposed to tell the truth, or actually to give you an impression of what truth is. So what I would do on my day-to-day job is basically trying to give you as much as illustration of the truth as possible so you can actually make your own opinion, right? So that would be my definition of truth, but is it the truth? I have no idea.
And how do you go about selecting the things you're going to present?
So the main idea here is really to try to, again, understand as much as possible one story and give you as much angle actually as possible so that you can actually forge your own opinion in the end. But again, there's no such thing as neutrality. So subjectivity is part of it at every single point. When I'm choosing a guest to feature in the show, when I'm actually choosing an angle to tell you about one part of this truth, I'm being subjective. But it is my duty actually to give you as much subjectivity as possible so you can actually have a glimpse at what every single angle of the story is, so you can have your own perception.
Great. We'll come back to this and your view from Europe, which is a little bit different than what we're seeing in the US. Vijay, tell us about pin drop and how you got into this whole space of deepfakes.
Yeah, so hi, Vijay Balasubrahmanyam. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Pindrop, and we work in the voice authentication and voice security space. Where we started off is we started providing voice authentication and security for some of the largest banks here in the US. And the problem that they're trying to solve is when you call them, they're trying to identify you. And what they do is they ask you questions, passwords, pins, all kinds of things, right? How many of you have had what's your mother's maiden name kind of question, right? And so ultimately what...
Isn't there, Vijay, a database somewhere that tells everybody's mother's maiden name? I mean, that kind of...
the craziest thing is one of my favorite calls is this fraudster calls in and this call center agent says, what's your mother's maiden name? And he says, my dad married thrice, so can I take 3 guesses? That doesn't even make sense, right? So what if your dad married thrice? You have one mother. He takes the top 3 mothers' maiden names in the US. His last one is Smith, which happens to be a very popular mother's maiden name, and he wires $97,000 to a bank in England.
That worked.
That worked, yes. So, we deal with imposters on every single day, and over time these attacks have gotten more and more sophisticated, so much so that fraudsters have started using things like deepfakes to start essentially impersonating CEOs, telling CFOs, hey, I have an important merger and an acquisition to make. Can you wire $17 million to this particular account so that I can do this, right? And so that got us interested into the entire concept of deepfakes. And it's an extremely interesting space because it blurs the line between information and misinformation. So,
yeah, and we'll come back to deepfakes, and I know, Marjorie, you've engaged a number of people in this topic as well, just to underscore how important this problem is, and it's happening rapidly. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Vijay, but your company's already raised something like $200 and some million.
Yeah, we've raised about $200 million, and last year alone we caught about $350 million in just fraudulent attempts, right?
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot happening in this space, because if there's a gang that we catch out of West Africa, which we call West Africa 1, all they do is wake up every day and dial for dollars, right? So they're calling CEOs, CFOs, they're calling banks, insurance companies, retailers, and off late they're also going after IoT systems, right? Your TV speaks to your refrigerator, speaks to your car. So I can beat that.
They're called West Africa One. Do they have like team T-shirts?
They do.
Merchandise and stuff like that.
They are the most aggressive group, and we've been slowly picking off members of that group, identifying them. getting law enforcement to act on them. But yeah, it's like a multi-headed demon, right? It keeps coming back.
Great. Later on, we'll come back to what do we as citizens, how could we even think about, what do we do about this?
Yep.
Okay. Christian, what's your take? AI, computer science, entrepreneur, professor at Northwestern. What's your take on the truth thing?
Well, I mean, truth is an absolutely gorgeous, pure, wonderful thing that almost nobody wants. This is, I think, part of this is embodied. A lot of the sort of anything, most things in AI that generate information or faces or voices, none of them are hooked to truth. But they're there generating things. But the reason why I do what I do, and that is we have a company, Narrative Science, that literally is a truth-preserving system. That is, we have a system that looks at data, figures out what's going on in the world, figures out how it should be structured in terms of a set of ideas, and then turns it into a story for you. But the wonderful thing about it is that the story has to be true. And in fact, it's traceable that it's true. That for every single word that the system says, everything it gives you, you can go back and look at why it was generated, where the analysis came from, what decisions were made, all the way down to the data level. And that's a very different relationship between things that are happening in the world and the information that we get than we see anywhere else. And I think for me, that's a kind of approach that we need to start taking towards the truth. You can't judge the truth of a thing anymore by what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it reads like. In fact, the things that you want the most that are in front of you are usually not the things that are true because you want them so badly. And we're now entering a time where it's necessary for us to figure out a different way to evaluate the truth that has nothing to do with the thing itself. It has to do with being able to find out where it came from.
Christian, you used a provocative notion of preserving the truth, and then you talked about facts, and I think we all feel the connection there, but how do facts relate to truth?
I think they're both in the realm of some relationship to the actual world. Truth is, I think truth is, when we talk about truth, we're talking about things that are genuinely attached to the world. There is no subjectivity, there is no interpretation. It's the things that are attached to the world. Facts are our way of expressing those things, are our way of representing those things, are our way of talking to each other about those things. But then there's this other world of things that look so much like facts, those things are, again, indistinguishable from the facts themselves on their surface level, on the way they look, on the way they feel, on the way we hear them. The job now is to be able to figure out that difference. But I believe in the cave. I believe that we're in the cave and there's something out there and there's light coming across it, yeah. And we see the shadows. But now we're in a world where we have dozens upon dozens of people with hand puppets making more shadows for us. And we cannot see immediately the difference between what is really out there and what is being presented to us.
So we're all in Plato's cave right now.
Yeah.
But are you proposing that there are these people with nefarious intent? Maybe some of them don't have nefarious intent. They're inventing things with the hand puppets. But are you proposing that there's somebody starting to wander outside the cave? No, we're all still stuck in the cave.
In fact, not only are we stuck in the cave, but our interpretation, we look at the shadows. And we don't even look at those shadows and see the things even vaguely directly. We even got a layer of interpretation. And so when one of those shadows actually is the shadow we want, that's the shadow we believe. And so we're part of this deal too. It's not just nefarious people. It's that when something appeals to us, we have a tendency to believe it more. For me, actually, the canonical example for me was when the Steele dossier was made sort of public. And there was this description of this tape of Trump.
Yeah.
And I looked at that description and I thought, that can't be true. And the reason why I believed it couldn't be true is because I so wanted it to be true. And it was clear, from my point of view, it was crafted for people like me to embrace it and run with it.
We call that red meat, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And that's what it was.
And now we can do it. We can do that with not only there's a story of a tape, but quite truthfully, someone could actually make that tape. with all the technology
Yeah.
we've got today.
So, Vijay, are we in a situation where what looks absolutely definitely like it should be true actually probably isn't? I mean, what is technology doing to us? Give us an example.
Yeah, so, there are many, many examples.
An example, and then how Pindrop how do we even protect ourselves from this kind of activity?
Yeah, so, there's a lot of examples, right? So in the voice world, there are these fraudsters who fundamentally, try to synthesize or impersonate a person, and they do a variety of things, right? There's, if many of you remember the Nancy Pelosi slurred speech, right? That wasn't a deep fake, that was a cheap fake, right?
What's the difference between a cheap fake and a deep fake?
I mean, a deep fake is actually using artificial intelligence and machine learning to construct a video of someone where that person hasn't done those things, right? Whereas a cheap fake, what happened in Nancy Pelosi's case was what they did is they just slowed down the video so that it looked like she was slurring in a speech. So that's a cheap fake, right? And so you have variants of that as well, right? Because if you actually think about it, our brain is remarkably good at trying to convince us of things that are true, right? Because if you took all the information from the world, what you saw and what you heard, and you were trying to make sense of every small molecule of it, you'd go crazy.
Yeah.
Your brain tends to make all of these approximations of things, which actually helps you, but it also puts you in a very, very bad spot with respect to these things, right? And so, there are fraudsters who, fundamentally want to go after a woman's account, and all they do is increase the frequency of their voice to start sounding more feminine, right? And so there's a fraudster that we oftentimes catch, he's nicknamed by the banks as Chipmunk because
And all these people who are
Yeah.
active have nicknames.
yes, they do, because when the problem becomes so bad, you always personify the problem, right? And that's what happened with these guys, right? Like when we go into these organizations, they're like, Chipmunk's calling again. And we're like, who's Chipmunk? And it's like this guy who uses this distortion technology to increase the frequency of his voice, and occasionally he makes the mistake and he sounds like Alvin the Chipmunk, right? Extremely squeaky. And so, there are things like that, but there are these extremely sophisticated systems which synthesize voice, right? And it's actually really simple, right? We've built our own deepfake voice synthesizer, and we have not only a voice synthesizer, which what it does is it takes a piece, like, so for example, if we wanted to synthesize President Trump, right, saying something, and, if we had a monitor, I could actually demonstrate it live for you folks, and we can do this.
By the way, we've got
Yeah.
plenty of that. We don't need it.
So Trump, right, what you need is just about 5 minutes of his audio. And once you have 5 minutes of his audio, you can get a machine to start figuring out what are his mannerisms, right? And what it's trying to do is figure out his entire vocal, nasal cavity and the way he says huge instead of huge.
And we can
things
do
like
this
that.
with almost anyone.
You
And
can
I
do it with-
remember a conversation
Yeah.
early about this, actually at Europe at a Kinternet, maybe a bunch of Kinternet friends out there in the front row, thanks. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And there was an argument about how fast this was going to come.
Yeah.
And people were on all sides of this spectrum. Give us an example of something that companies can do to
Yeah.
combat this stuff.
Yeah, the good news is, right, like especially if you look at something like voice, right, someone's voice, it's created over millions of years of human evolution. And so, for example, when you say hello, Paul, your mouth is wide open when you say hello, and when you say Paul, it closes quite rapidly, right? But the speed at which you can do that only has a certain pace. You can't do that much faster than human evolution allows you to do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of these systems don't care for boundaries like that. They're just trying to make your ear more convinced, because in order to cross that, you just need more audio and more processing
I
power.
see.
So you can look at things like another fraudster is called Giraffe Man, because when you actually analyze his audio, you find that the only person who could physically produce this audio is someone who would had to have a 7-foot-long neck with vocal cords that rapidly move between things, right? So there are telltale signs, but if you have enough audio of a person, and that's the key, right? Like tons of audio and tons of good audio, right? Like that also creates a problem, right? Podcasts of someone, right? Like Joe Rogan. If you have enough podcasts of Joe Rogan, you can create a fake version of Joe Rogan that is, pretty close to the real thing. And so you're now in this world where you're trying to figure out what's the next data breach, right? Is it going to be an audio breach? Because now people are looking, your data was important, now your audio and your video is going to be important.
Yeah, and I would assume if you've got audio and video, you can look at both factors to try
Exactly.
and uncover the...
Right, video, for example, right, the initial deepfakes, one of the things that you could find out is they didn't have a very good representation of blinking, right? The way you blink has a certain pattern to it, right? And they weren't very good with blinking. In fact, a lot of those deepfake videos didn't blink at all, right?
Yeah.
Again, right, it's human evolution that requires you to blink, but that's not what these videos care about. Now they fixed that, right? Like deepfakes have fixed that. But that's the truth with all information, misinformation, security, insecurity, right? It's an arms
Offense,
race.
defense.
Yeah.
Marjorie, how does this look in Europe? I remember about 5-6 years ago, actually, Brian Hoff from Exelon. I was with a couple of execs from Exelon. We went to Germany and Denmark. We were talking about the future of energy. But at that time, it wasn't even on the agenda. At that time, in all three of our roundtables, distrust of Google and Facebook and all these companies came right to the front. And it surprised us. Now it's starting to come across the ocean. But what are you seeing from the European perspective about truth, about free speech, creation of deepfakes, et cetera?
Well, first, the mistrust or distrust about platforms, American platforms, is actually definitely crossing the ocean and eating the campaign trail when it comes to the Democratic nomination, though, with Elizabeth Warren and so on. But still, it won't surprise you if I just answer by regulation, my friend. So yes, of course, Europe has been, over the past 2 years per se, masterminding what regulation and legislation can be when it comes to privacy, when it comes to data, and now probably when it comes to fake news. So especially in France, we actually passed a law 6 months ago on fake news, which was a huge controversy between journalists and between this administration and, of course, the parliament, because there's no way that actually a judge can tell you what truth is and what truth is not. So we, as journalists, really try to defend what we already have in terms of law, which is called the Freedom Press Law, passed in 1881. So it's definitely relaying from the 19th century, but probably should have been modernized more than passing another law, which is going to regulate what fake news is. So we definitely have to deal with...
How are they imagining regulating, telling the difference between fake news and Margie, I'd like what you see, and Christian, you sort of move forward. So then you,
Yes, so that's definitely the problem. How can you actually make sure something is true or not? Something is definitely a fact and not. And this is definitely this multi-layer type of challenge we have to face and cope with when it comes to being a media nowadays. First, we have to compete with fake news and fake news factories. And then, and actually what is likable in terms of truth. What you are more likely to believe or not. Then we have to compete with other media brands because people will love aiding us just for the reason and the purpose we are a media brand. So they will be hammering us for giving actually or sharing opinions just for the reason again that we're a brand. And then there's definitely deepfakes we have to compete with. And I'm not mentioning
and you could get caught.
Giraffes, but
and as a journalist, you could get caught believing a deep fake. That
well, and then actually, I mean, the blinking, type of thing is definitely something that was still super easy for us to detect. If deepfakes are not blinking anymore, then we're doomed, basically. So we really have to, I mean, even us as journalists, we really have to educate ourselves to actually recognize what is a deepfake or whatever technology is going to compete with truth and not. And I know there have been some very interesting projects and research made by a lot of different media organizations on should we blockchain any facts, for instance, to make sure that they're actually truth. Should we actually rely on more created technologies, such as yours, for instance, to actually make sure, again, that a news is actually breaking for the real purpose it's in news. But still, I mean, and it's probably, I mean, for those who've been taking part to one of the workshops we had this morning about why we should more humanize technology, it's still getting back to the very same basic. What is the purpose? What do we want to achieve? What do we want to convey in terms of messages? And are people more likable to actually trust us because we're actually going to deliver a pure, truthworthy piece of information. And that's definitely the world we have to live in.
Well, that's the hope. And I want to come back to this freedom of speech. How do we rectify vigilance with freedom of speech. But before I do that, I'm going to pass it to Christian, because you have a perspective. You say people are looking for what they want to believe.
I mean, right now I think there are three real trends that are accelerating. One, weaponization of information delivery. That is, the notion that I can identify people who, if I give them the right kind of information, I can shove them in a particular direction. The second is everything having to do with deepfake. That is audio, video, and actually the content, the generation of the content itself. And then the third is the very human tendency to want to confirm. And so when we see things that confirm what we believe, that makes us comfortable. And when we hear things or see things that we don't want to believe, it makes us uncomfortable. And those three things together are putting us in a world where we are going to have a flood of relatively inexpensive to generate of fake information or false information, and sometimes not even false information, put in the hands of the people who are going to twist in one direction or another, and it will make them happy. Right? So those three things are happening all at once.
And you said it will make them happy.
Because if you see a piece of news, if you believe that there's a certain trend that's going to happen in the world, and you see a piece of news that says it is, that actually makes you happy. If you see something that says it's not, it makes you unhappy. And in fact, if you really believe in something, or you've dedicated yourself to something, you've invested in something, you will resist even hearing the other point of view. And so complete balkanization of information, balkanization of certainly points of view, and then weaponization of the fact that that's the case. Those are coming. I mean, when I think about where the technology is, it's like, yes, they used to not be able to blink. They do now. 5 years from now, oh my God, it's going to be incredible.
What is 5 years from now? Any thoughts?
Well, I mean, to me, again, I'm getting back to the media brain part of it.
Sure.
So it's not even being the most trusted naming news anymore, or being fair and balanced, or having any one of those taglines. It's just trying to resist and to still be a media. It can be a television, radio, a website, it can be print media, still making a difference and having an audience or audiences, plural, that are going to consume news, that are going to act as citizens, that are going to vote, that are going to be users of technologies, and in the end, make a difference. But still, I mean, it's going to be quite challenging.
So what's 5 years, Vijay?
Yeah, so 5 years from now, we're going to live in a world of a lot of information, disinformation, but just as, I'm always a big believer in, human fortitude, right? When, the Ponzi scheme originated, like everyone believed Ponzi because he was a phenomenal liar, and everyone fell for it, right? Like massive amounts. Yeah. And then you learned, and then you said, okay, I'm never going to fall for that. There's still, these multi-level marketing schemes, but you don't fall for it at the scale of Ponzi, right? And so I think we as humans are also going to start getting more skeptical, starting to look for where is this source of truth coming from, right? Because, and you're going to have, journalism actually take it to what journalism truly stands for, right? That is really being, going towards, the truth will prevail, right? Going towards that answer and trying to figure it out. And once people start realizing that there is going to be that objectivity that a particular news source provides, you're going to start going towards that. You're always going to have people who want to believe what they want to believe. That misinformation, disinformation hasn't changed that, right? Like what it's changed is the ability for you to reach them much, much quicker, right? Yeah. Otherwise, it was just a campaigner going to local places and saying.
I'd say the ability to figure out who they are specifically.
Exactly. So that's if someone's already made their mind up that that's the way they're going to think. Yeah. I don't know what you can do about it.
So, Christian, I'm going to send it to you because what's 5 years, but I want to prep everybody for a wonderful question. They weren't given this question before.
Wow.
At the end, I want each of you to answer the question in 3 words or less. What is truth? 3 words or less, what is truth? Okay, with that set up, Christian, what's 5 years from now?
I think 5 years from now, we're going to be living in the world of the Borges story, the Library of Babel.
Oh, right, yes.
Where there's every book that could be written has been written and is someplace. And somewhere, there are things that are true, there are things that are false. And somewhere in there is the index. But there's another book right next to it that looks like the index but is wrong. And it's going to turn out that we're not going to be able to open the books and determine the truth from them. we're going to have to find another way to determine the correspondence of actual things, of things we see in the world, things that were shown, and the truth of the world, and that is find a way to ground things again. I actually don't mind the idea of having it be that AI has messed this up somewhat, and blockchain might help us fix it. And that means that the bar for journalists, the bar for truth gets way high and it's harder.
Yeah.
But so be it. So be it. And I have to admit, I don't believe that the truth will out on its own. And I don't believe that being skeptical ends up working. And what's odd is I think that believing that the truth will out and believing that skepticism will win and we'll be able to fight against this on our own because we're resilient, that is an example of having a belief and not being willing to see what's happening. That's not accepting the truth of it.
So if truth will not out, what will?
It won't out on its own. It's not a thing that will make itself available to us on its own. There's nothing about the expression of a thing that's true and the expression of a thing that's not true, but they look the same. There's nothing about the truth that shines on its own. There has to be a way, though, for us to be able to figure out where that truth comes from. And the things that aren't true won't have the same provenance. They won't have the same basis.
Yeah, but that's too high a bar, right? That's the thing, right? Like when Mitt Romney came out and said those things that fundamentally scuttled his campaign, that was a perfectly right video. This is the thing, right? Like when you want to have this extremely high bar towards things, you move away from practicalism, right? Like it's the people who created, cryptography. They wanted, public key cryptography. Everyone's going to have certificates. Everyone's going to have perfect provenance, and only then are we going to trust anything. Public key cryptography didn't go anywhere, and that's the difference between being an academic and being practical, right? I think there's a huge
That's
difference.
the difference.
It's a huge difference.
Finally.
Right? And I think technology is definitely
We finally learned
I
it,
am
Christian.
cut, dare I say it, to the quick.
I think that's the thing, right? You have to have technology. I think it's a bleak future where there's a lot of misinformation, information, but you'll have to use technology, right? In places where you could have the true provenance of a source of video or audio, that's awesome. But that's not going to be every single case, and you have to use technology, a combination of technology and humans, to figure out what the right answer
Well,
is.
by the way, this has all been oh my gosh, the sky is falling, because it is.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of wonderful stuff here, right? These technologies enable us to create and invent things that we couldn't have done even a few years ago.
Yeah, but
Marjorie,
that's the purpose of every
last
single
word on
technology in every single way you can actually use technology, right, to solve a problem or not. So you want the 3 words?
last word on this, and then we'll go to the 3 words.
Okay, so I think again, we have a lot of challenges, that we'll have to cope in the next few years. But still, I think the way you can actually just look back and just trace the actual source of a truth is definitely a way we should more use when it comes to media, just for the reason that it's going to give you the reason why you should actually look at so many different perspectives when it comes to truth. Truth is plural per se, so you definitely have to try to get as much as possible angles to actually group those truths plural and make it like one story.
Gather, assess.
Yep,
evaluate.
actually it's like the oldest job we've been doing as journalists forever. Just go back to the basics and listen to people, and of course feedback is just crucial. I think that we have lost track of our audiences just for the reason that we've been just been gathering in our studios, like TV studios, with pundits and with experts for so long that we totally lost track of what a feedback and what audiences' engagement can be. So we definitely have to trust more audiences to actually follow us and engage in discussion and debates with us.
By the way, finding a lot of sources, evaluating them, combining them, synthesizing them, it becomes more confusing and daunting, but also technology can help us do this. Bob Hendrickson has been thinking a lot about this. If you're interested, he's right here with us on this topic. So we're going to come to that question now, that summarize what is truth, however you want, in 3 words or less. By the way, hyphens are acceptable. Who would like to go first?
Well,
Christian?
Truth requires proof.
Wow.
Truth requires proof. And it rhymes, extra points.
That's good. Yeah, exactly.
Vijay,
Truth is Copernican.
truth is what?
Copernican. What you
Copernican.
said. Yeah, what you said at the beginning, right? Like
Yes.
I mean, the Earth revolves around the sun,
Yeah.
not the other way around.
Actually, of course, Kant referred to his revolution as the Copernican revolution, which is horribly confusing. But in any case, Marjorie.
Well, to me, truth would be more of a common good and should probably be defended by any SDG.
You guys have a good math
common-
system in France, don't you?
There you go.
What?
A common good.
A common good. Great. So,
That's 3 words. I mean, to me, it's actually, from my perspective and my truth, this is 1, 2, 3 words.
the red light's flashing, isn't it, Marjorie? Now, that's wonderful. If deep fakes are blinking, we're doomed. A gorgeous thing nobody wants. I've never heard that before. I love that. And anybody who can bring Borges into a conversation, I urge everybody to read Labyrinth's collection of short stories. The greatest author ever never wrote a novel. We need something to ground things. Maybe there isn't anything underneath, but we need to build something underneath, and we have to keep rebuilding it. Cheap fakes, deep fakes, all kinds of fakes. But those fakes can be used for good or bad, and we have to figure out which one we're up to. We're going to become more skeptical, and that's kind of a downer, but it's also something we're going to face. It sort of sounds like growing up, becoming an adult, doesn't it? In these conversations, there is no such thing as objectivity, and that's scary. What we have confronted here in this 28 minutes is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and freedom of speech. We've confronted the Constitution and the French Revolution all in 28 minutes. Thank you so much to the panel.